part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Producing While Asian. Today's episode is a conversation with Ted Arthur, a Broadway musical director who is currently the music director for Diana, the new musical. Today we talk about his experiences as a music director and where he came from to get to where he is today, and also some of his pieces of advice for people looking to get into the music part of the theater industry. So we hope you enjoy today's conversation, and welcome again to Producing While Asian. Welcome to Producing While Asian, Ted. It's so good to see you. I know it's been years since I've seen you in person, and also years because of the pandemic. It's just great to have you as a guest on the show. So how have you been?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here, and thank you for asking. Things are, starting back up with theater. It's been almost 20 months or so, and so I think, to be working right now, it's very fortunate, and so I think definitely don't take that for granted.
For sure. So we'll dive right into your story. So for our listeners who don't follow you already or don't already know who you are, give us a little bit of like a Spark Notes version of how you started in the industry and how you came to be where you are today.
So I went to college to study broadcast journalism and music. And I actually wasn't going to go into music. I went to school basically to be kind of doing what you're doing, be a reporter or being, on the media and be a broadcast journalist. And that's what I was going to do. And I went to school for that, but I got a degree in piano performance. And just because I have always been studying music and wanted to see that through college. And after I graduated in December of 2008, I was looking for work, and the economy wasn't great back then, right at that time. And so I was, applying for TV jobs, and no one was hiring at the time. And a job opened up in my hometown in West Lafayette, Indiana, at Purdue University as an accompanist and assistant director for their choral program. And so I applied for that, and I got the job and took it as a sign that, I should do this for now and put journalism on hold. And so I was there at Purdue and worked with the Glee Club, a 50-piece men's choir, and did arranging and playing, and did that for 4 years. And then decided it was time to move on and try something different. And I, always had a yearning to, it was since I had been in music now for 4 years, I found that I really did love it. And so I do think things happen for a reason. And so I stayed with music, and I've always wanted to write television and film. So I actually moved to LA and got to work with an incredible Hollywood composer, and did that for a year and realized that was not what I was supposed to be doing. It was great because I got to do exactly what I wanted to do, or I thought at least, and realized that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And so I had been thinking about LA or New York, before I moved from Purdue. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to move to a new city and look for work, and moved to New York in February of 2014. And knowing nobody. And I remember the week after I moved, we got a huge snowstorm. So it was just, everybody was saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're moving to New York in the winter. But I did that, and, again, didn't know anybody, but I cold emailed casting departments. And I remember putting my flyers up at Ripley Greer, if you need an accompanist or something, and cold emailing music directors and pianists on Broadway, and sitting in on shows and just watching. I think in February and March, I probably sat in 12 pits, just sitting and watching and, meeting people, and things happened, and I made connections. And, I think I owe a lot of credit to Ben Cohn, who at the time was the key one player at Wicked. He brought me into Broadway Cares, and my first, big job in theater was working on the Easter Bonnet, which was the Broadway Cares spring collection. And that kind of went from there. I don't know how far you
No, that's great.
go.
Yeah. So yeah, and so would you say that that gig definitely opened up the doors to kind of all of the kind of more mainstream, bigger opportunities that came your way, getting to the point of music directing new shows and the shows that were opening up on Broadway in the last 5 years or so? What would you say was like, I mean, obviously the motivator was to find a job, but in that time, what kept you going? Like, talk about, were there, I know you mentioned one name, but were there other people that, you can really say, I leaned on these folks to keep me going, keep me inspired, to keep pounding the pavement until I got that first gig?
Yeah, I just had no idea what the culture was like in theater. And in the musician circle and in Broadway music directors and staff, I found everyone to be really generous with their time and generous with their insights. So I was able to meet a lot of people, and a lot of people said, sure, come and sit and watch the show, or sure, I'll meet you for a coffee. And so I think as a community as a whole, they were very nurturing, and they are today. There's a real sense of someone did this for me, and so I want to pay this back. And I think that's really wonderful in our industry, because I think it can, you think that it may be really competitive, and it is competitive. It's Broadway,
Sure,
and
sure.
it's definitely, people are competing for different jobs, but I do think as a whole, it's very community based. So there are a lot of people like Ben Cohn, like I said, was a huge mentor of mine, still is. And Mary Mitchell Campbell is a huge mentor. Ian Eisendrath. There's a lot of people who trusted in me something and entrusted in me a show or a project, and really took a chance. Because I think in this industry as well, it's hard because there's no real audition process. You have to kind of just prove yourself. And so people need to give you an opportunity. And there were a lot of people that did.
That's awesome. So going back to mentioning challenges. So to break in, as we all know, it can be hard. Talk to us a little bit about the experience, not just being new in the New York scene. And you can even talk about like your experience in film too, like kind of going over about LA, being somebody who works in music, who is new, but also identifies as AAPI. Talk about those specific challenges. Have you run into anything that you feel is worth highlighting for folks that might be trying to understand our experience in this industry that is, as we all know, mostly run by people who are white? So, how did that factor into your journey? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I've clocked. There are not a lot of Asian musicians in Broadway pits. There are not a lot of Broadway music directors. I knew of David Lai before, for a while, and I knew that he was music director over at Phantom. But when I'm sitting in these pits, in 2014, there's definitely, I thought for sure there would be a lot of Asian musicians in pits, especially pianists, because I grew up going to IU, like a piano group at IU, and piano camps growing up, and there were always, I feel, a lot of Asians in the classical world, and so to not see that was surprising to me. So, but I do feel like, at least as a musician, it is all about, will you do a good job? Will you show up on time? Are you good to work with? And those are really the important things. And those things, it doesn't matter what you look like for those. And so there is a disconnect, though, that there are not very many Asian musicians in Broadway right now.
Right. And, I feel the same way as you do. And this, obviously is a stereotype that we've grown up with, is the like, oh, musicians, there's a lot of Asians, and so to have that realization is fascinating to hear, because do you think, in your opinion, that it might be intimidating for anybody that does identify as AAPI to go into that, because they can be as confident as they are in their musicianship, but to want to go into that part of the arts industry, do you think it's intimidating in the sense that, like, there might not be an advocate for them? There might not be somebody who's specifically looking out for them, and they kind of, they'd rather just go the route that might make, and I don't want to say make more sense, but like a route that might be a little easier than to try and break into this circle, just because of that lack of role model or mentor or ally, really, who'd want to pull them in.
I mean, I think there are definitely not very many Asian people in positions of leadership across
Right.
the board, whether it be music directors or directors or choreographers, actors, like all across the industry. And I think for me, I never even considered Broadway or musical theater as a way to make a living and a career in music. I grew up in the classical background, and I was not even thinking about that at all, about working in theater. I thought if I wanted to have a career in music, it would have to be a classical pianist, which I did not want to do. So it wasn't until I, was trying to look at other options that I came across this as a potential thing. And I didn't really actually think it was a potential way to make a career until after I moved to New York. So I think that, because, we know Lang Lang and Yo-Yo Ma, classical musicians, but there are, there is not a lot of high profile musicians on Broadway.
Right.
And so I think maybe there are not a lot of people that others can look up to. I definitely didn't know any Asian musicians before I moved to New York. And so I think visibility is so important right now to show that, yes, you can have this career, you can make a living. It's not, only classical or other genres.
For sure. And I also think it's interesting to say that with musicians and music directors, like, it's like your track in our industry is essential. It's so essential. Like, I know a lot of people know this, but there are people that sometimes don't remember that, like, musical theater doesn't happen without music, and music doesn't happen without musicians. So when you are going into our industry, I hope that people are coming in and saying that, like, I'm important, like I'm needed. All parts are important, obviously, but the music part and the musicianship part, you can't have a new song if you don't have a person, unless you play it yourself. You don't have a person who's supporting you musically. And so I think sometimes, like, I even forget, I'm like, I always need an accompanist, I always need a music director for projects and things like that. So I am excited to see and know that there's an effort for more people that are like us to come into this community to make that effort. And also that we're now, like you are in music and I am in producing, that we sit in seats that we're able to be the mentors that we didn't have, to be the allies that we didn't see when we came in. So we've got to start somewhere. So I think that's great. I mean, that in this season alone, we were able to bring in 2 Asian music directors already. That'll just lead to more, because I feel like a big thing in our field is the time-old excuse of, I couldn't find them, and like I don't know where they are. And that's why this podcast exists, is to show people we're here. You can't find AAPI people, because the one that really got me was shows that are about a specific ethnicity, and they claim they can't find that person of that ethnic background, and they are there. So I'm excited to see more Asian friends, people come into the Broadway houses, into music. Is there anything that you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think it's to investing in the pipeline as well, because getting people opportunities, getting them in where they normally weren't able to get in, or an opportunity, is so important. I mean, I'm a member of Muse, which is Musicians United for Social Equity, and that's the top priority, is investing in that pipeline. And so it's getting people, opportunities they weren't able to get themselves or didn't have the chance. So it's getting them in the door. And I think that's a big thing, because once you're able to do that, there's more, like you said, people, there's less of an excuse to say, I don't know any Asian drummers.
Right. Somebody said on another episode, which I thought was fascinating, was, and I'll mention it's Stephen Cuevas, who he mentioned saying that he has music directed a lot, but he's never music directed an Asian show. And, he's music directed plenty of things, but he's never had the opportunity to do like Miss Saigon or South Pacific or shows that have Asian characters and Asian storylines. And there was another person who I spoke to who is a friend of mine, an actor in DC, who said that she has done Asian shows, but she's never been reviewed by an Asian critic. And so like you're saying earlier, visibility, specifically speaking about music, I think that's, to your point of not being able to find people, finding Asian music directors to music direct an Asian show, you think would make all the sense. But it's that pipeline building that we're talking about, and how to make sure that there's a way to find people who can. Because in Stephen's experience, he was like, I've only seen, white people music direct these shows. He was like, but when it comes to a show like Dreamgirls or a show like, In the Heights, you see more of an effort to find a Latinx music director or a African-American music director. Why is this any different? And so, unfortunately, it falls to that same, we can't find them idea. But so I'm hoping that this is a door to to more people of Asian ethnicity directing Asian shows musically. So
hi, my name is Sam Post, owner of Phenomenal CBD Store and phenomenalcbd.com. That's like phenomenal, CBD.com. Tune in where we talk with experts about how the amazing hemp plant can make a difference for people's health and well-being, from the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Ted Arthur, and you're watching Producing While Asian.
In your experience recently, I know you've been opening a lot of new shows as a music director and being in those Broadway houses, and you deal with a lot of producers, I would say. Not necessarily directly all the time, but they're definitely in your orbit, and you talk to them. So tell us a little bit about the question that we ask every guest on this scale of 1 being not at all, to producer being like, I think I am a producer in addition to being a music director. Where do you think you sit on that scale, in your opinion, based on what you've seen so far, or where you want to go? Because I know that there was one project that you're on with our mutual friend Elise Arndt, Sing Baby Sing, where you were the music director, but you also were writing music and really involved in the process. So where would you say you fall within that range?
It's an interesting question, because I think, nowadays everyone's doing a lot of jobs and they're wearing a lot of hats. And I do think, as a producer, you're really overseeing everything about the show. Mm-hmm. For me, I prefer to be much more kind of on the ground in the creative world of things. Like with Elise's show, it was a lot of creating the arrangements and working with the director and working with Elise and trying to shape it, but also having a hand in helping with other side of things with the production. So, like for Diana, I mean, it's our lead producer Beth Williams is just so amazing in how she kept the show afloat during this pandemic, whether it was getting a PPP to have a online workshop in June of 2020, whether it was coordinating the monumental task of filming the show for Netflix during a quarantine, which logistically is, incredible, and then opening the show back on Broadway again. So, where I definitely bow to that that
Sure.
logistical feat. For me, I love being in down, on the ground, making it, and in the music and working with the director. And so don't have a lot of experience with that, the producing side of things, but I find myself gravitating more to the creative side.
Sure. And I feel like the term producer, it fluctuates. There's no one definition of what a producer is, but there is a uniform kind of like task, right? The producer, like as we kind of touched on, is the organizer, the one who kind of keeps people aware and kind of almost like a den mom or a papa bear, like somebody who's just making sure everybody's good. But I feel like at some level everybody is a producer in some sense of the word, because it's just once you get down into the departments of a show, everybody's in charge of their group and their section of everything. And so, but yeah, it's always interesting to hear my guests' answers to that question, because it is such an amorphous question. It's not like a yes or no. It's kind of asking you to almost self-define in a way, but but not permanently. Obviously people can change, and that opinion can change too. But did you see this career being as successful as it is? I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but in your wildest dreams, did you see yourself opening a Broadway show as a music director? And if you didn't, that's fine. If you did, that's awesome. But I would say, like, is this something that you're like, this is going to happen one day? Or is this like, oh, wow, this is so cool, and here I am, and in a more kind of pleasant surprise kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I moved to New York, the goal was I didn't really even know a lot about the hierarchy of a music department. And my goal was to play on Broadway one day. And, I remember walking in Midtown past stage doors and thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to just walk right in without having to say, who I am, and wait, and not being allowed in, just that being my place of work. And I was actually looking at my journal from back then recently, just with the opening and things. And, it was a lot of waiting by the phone and waiting for emails to hear back from people. And, my week being totally empty of anything to do. And oh my gosh, am I gonna, what am I doing? And so I do remember a lot of that. I at that time, I never thought I would be a music director on Broadway. And, as I spent more time here and working, that became a goal of mine. And, after I made my debut on Broadway and playing and subbing and working, I guess I never really, it was always a goal, but the goal always felt, on the other side of the room. And I had no idea how I would get over there. And, everyone's career has a different path to where they finally will end up. And I feel like this was just a really fortunate opportunity, for sure. And it just happened. I just happened to get across the room maybe quicker than I thought. I had no idea.
Yeah. It's awesome. So in getting across the room, tell us a little bit of kind of, is there anybody that you've worked with so far that was super, super memorable? Do you have any feel good stories that you want to share of oh wow, that was, it doesn't have to be an incredible experience, but a touching moment for you in your journey so far that you're like, oh, that was, a really great memory?
Yeah, I think there are a couple people.
Someone or somewhere. It doesn't have to be a person, but
Yeah, I think, like I said, Ben, I owe so much to Ben. He's a good friend and mentor, and he brought me into Wicked. I was doing stuff for Broadway Cares, and he brought me into Wicked. I made my Broadway debut over there, and he's just one of the nicest guys. And it just, showed me that there are nice people in this industry. Not, everyone, I feel like everyone's been very nice, but Ben really was really took a chance on me. And I think that you need someone like that to do that, because people are so, protective of their shows and of their chairs. And,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really get to sub unless, you have the credentials to back it up. But how do you get those credentials? It's this vicious cycle. And, I think he was really one that helped me. And like I said, I met Mary Mitchell Campbell, who's an amazing music director and supervisor, and she is just one of the nicest people, and she really trusts you, and she just leads with kindness. And I think that is something that I really have taken to heart and tried to, exemplify myself.
Definitely. And that's so important, the leading with kindness piece, because I feel like some people forget that once they get to a certain point. Not everyone, but there's a handful of folks that do. And luckily, I hope you haven't either, but luckily I haven't run into many of those folks. But, with leading with kindness and knowing that, like, even though Broadway seems like a big place, the theater industry is still very small. And, being genuine and being kind is just so paramount to making things work, especially if you have to collaborate with people. Because, like, you don't collaborate with anyone who you have heard is not very nice or has not been very nice to you either. Now that the industry is coming back and that, Broadway and the theater community as a whole nationwide is opening up again, in your opinion, based on your life pre-pandemic and now in this kind of reboot of what we're doing, what would you like to, and this is a two-part question, you don't have to answer both sides, but is there any aspect of it that you would like to see genuinely change in this new era of the theater industry? For example, like the movement to change the 10 out of 12, and things like that. Or is there anything that you remember from before the pandemic, before the closure, that you want to continue to see and see more of, encourage more of in this time?
Yeah, I do think that, we need to, as I said before, invest in the pipeline and get more diversity in our pits. And I think that is something that we lacked pre-pandemic. And Muse was developed during the pandemic, and it's gotten a lot of people thinking. And, I think it's, at least with Diana, what I'm trying to do is to make it not make it so high stress of getting perfect musicians in. We need to widen the pool of people, whether, so it's maybe giving someone a chance that is really good, but has just never played on Broadway and really wants to. And that may be, working with that person a little more and putting in a little more time. But again, it goes back to someone giving you an opportunity to step into the, to step through the door. And I think there's just a lot of stress, because Broadway is very expensive. Like, you don't want to put someone in a show and they somehow compromise the integrity of the show, obviously. And so that doesn't look good for that person, and that doesn't look good for the person that you're subbing for. And so there's a lot of like stress over that. And so I'm trying to, at least with Diana, somehow minimize that by, like I said, trying to spend extra time with that person, or talking with the band and saying, let's get, try to give a, opportunity to someone that you may not know, but you are working with, and help them succeed. And so I think a lot of it is that, and having that more, thinking about diversifying the pit. And I think that's something we can definitely work on post-pandemic.
For sure. And it's really awesome to see, just from all sides of this industry, that's becoming more of an effort, that we're seeing, from the acting side, from the producing side, from the music side, all parts of our community are kind of stepping up and speaking out and saying, like, we've hit this unintended reset time So let's take advantage of it. Let's make sure we can, bring social justice into our work and to our colleagues and make that change. Because now's the time, right? We're not going to wait another 30 years till we change something. And all industries really need to reflect the society that they're part of now, right? So, just like government, like your government has to reflect who's there. It can't be a minority that has the majority of the power. It has to shift. So
hey, it's Tito, host of the Premier Fantasy Podcast. Get all the news and analysis you need to dominate your fantasy league. I've been doing this as long as anybody in the business. I can help give you the edge.
It's not a rumor, it's the truth. Regai and Roder are back together again with the R&R podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We're going to talk Browns. We're going to talk Cavs, Indians, even if they're not playing well, which might happen. We're going to talk monsters. We're going to talk college football. You name it. When it comes to sports, Regai and Rhoda, we're going to break it down for you as only we can. So make sure you join us right here on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Ted Arthur, and you're watching Producing While Asian.
So now, given that, there's a lot of people now that are inspired to really get involved and to go for what they want. In this whole great resignation situation that's happening, people are changing careers and moving up, moving down, whatever, moving laterally. I expect our pipeline to start filling up. So for those that are kind of heading in that direction, from your own personal point of view, what are some things that you'd like to impart upon future musicians and music directors that are coming into this field? Obviously look for the mentors, look for, people that are kind and generous, but is there any other advice that you wish that you would have had coming into this?
I did receive a lot of advice when I moved to the city, and I have taken a lot of that to heart and continue to try to exemplify that and tell other people. And I think, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got was that, you're not going to be the best pianist in New York, and you're probably not going to be the worst. So you fit somewhere in the middle. You fit somewhere in here. You're in, in the middle of the pack. And what really separates you in this industry is how well you work with others. Because there are so many people that are pianists and musicians in New York. And, you're going to be working with a music team or in a pit for hopefully a long time. And it's really how well you work with others that really, that people want to be around. A person that is likable and that gets along with others and is collaborative. So that's a really big thing that I learned. You have to be ambitious. You have to be a self-starter and reach out to people and put yourself out there. These are big things that, if you want this career, you have to go and get, because there are so many people out there that are doing the same thing. So I think those are really important. Obviously, you have to be able to play your instrument. You have to be able, you have to be good. But right. there is so much more than that that's required in this industry. Just simple things like showing up on time, doing a good job. These are things that you can control, and being prepared. I think, like I said earlier, people gave me opportunities, and it was important not just to get the opportunity, but to deliver with that opportunity. So being prepared, doing all of your homework, and showing up and knowing, how to read a room and how to follow a choreographer, or knowing what music's coming up. So there's a lot involved, but these are all things that I think, people can hopefully control and be prepared for.
Yeah, and it's all advice that I feel like you can never hear enough, right? You can never hear that enough. Always do your homework, always be kind, always, be prepared, and just commit.
Yes. What's so interesting though, there are situations where, you think it's easy to do that, but a lot of people don't.
Right.
And so, really take that to heart. I think that these may be simple, like you say, and people tell you all the time, but they are very important.
There was a guest that I had who was a playwright, and she said something, Amanda Andre, and she said, remembering that you're worth it, especially, in our community, that like when you come into this room, you're going for this job for a reason, and remembering that you're worth it. You have the skills, you have the wherewithal to do this job, because otherwise you wouldn't be curious about it, and, don't stand in the way of your own success. Because I feel like there's a lot of that little voice inside that's like, oh yeah, you might not be able to do this, but like, putting that away and saying like, no, I'm worth it. Like, I'm worth getting hired. I'm worth being in this room, so I think that kind of ties all of that together. It's like, you're worth it. You can do that work, don't stand in your way.
Yeah. And I think we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome, when we walk into a room. I mean,
right.
Always, like, you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, like, can I do this? Or, can I play this? Or am I going to be ready if the director wants this? And I think there's always that, but you're right. I think you need to know that, you've made it this far, you deserve to be there. Exactly.
So we've had a very big change and loss in our community this past week. And, the death of Stephen Sondheim, who essentially was one of the big names that kind of created our jobs almost in a way, or was responsible for a lot of us having our careers. Tell us a little bit about kind of your artistic relationship to Sondheim's work, and kind of how has that affected your journey? And, if you have directed his work or have touched his work, which I feel like everybody has, tell us a little bit about what this change means to you, and kind of what I don't know, what maybe you could hope it would bring as well, in addition to the other things that you've mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never met Sondheim, and I actually have never done a Sondheim show. But I do think that, I came into theater fairly late. Like, I did theater growing up in high school, but again, it was just, like the summer activity or the fall activity. And so I did that for a couple of summers. And, growing up Into the Woods, of course, was playing that on repeat in my iPod or whatever it was. And along with a lot of other musical theater stuff. And so, like, obviously he was someone that I admired, and, it's someone that I looked up to. I have not done a Sondheim show to this day yet, but I did work on we did a 90th birthday celebration for him at the start of the pandemic, which was one of the first virtual videos, video projects. And
I remember watching that.
Yeah, and that was a huge undertaking, because one, just I think the biggest thing that I, obviously knew, but I didn't really get the full impact, was how prolific of an artist he was. And to be doing this full concert with all these wonderful people singing music, his music, it was just really, it hit me that of how much of an icon he was. And I think, to have, when we had that living legend, so to speak, show on Broadway, it was such a special, I think, thing to have. And I think we're all reflecting on that now as he passes, but his work continues on Broadway today. Definitely inspiration, definitely, one of the last amazing movers and shakers in our industry as a composer that people were able to that I know a lot of my colleagues worked with, which I think was really special.
Mm-hmm. So given that, because, we never know who's listening to this podcast, which is exciting. If there's a producer out there who's like, I'm going to, I think I want to produce a Sondheim show. In your dreams, Ted, what would be, let's say, we don't have to pick one. Let's say your top 3, like, Sondheim shows that you would love to music direct. And then after that, you answer that question, how can not only those producers, but anybody really who wants to collaborate with you, how can they find you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love, like I said, I grew up with Into the Woods. I love the music. I love Marilyn Roll On. I would love to do those two in some capacity. I think that would be, a real special thing, especially now. I being, after reflecting a lot about him and his work in the past couple of days, I think it would be a real honor and tribute to do that. I don't know in what capacity, but like I said, I think it's really, as an Asian music director too, I think I don't, want to put too much pressure on that, but I feel like it's,
oh, sure. Yeah.
As an Asian music director directing non-Asian shows, not that that should be a huge thing, but I feel like it's just another example of saying, anyone can do this. Asian music directors don't only have to music direct Miss Saigon. And I think, for some reason,
point of view.
Sondheim, sorry?
It's another point of view, like, in terms of how musically a show could be, Yeah,
and I feel like as an Asian music director directing a Sondheim show, I feel like that is a powerful image. And I think that would be, for me, very, very powerful. And I've never music directed an Asian show. And so I do feel fortunate to be able to be in that position where it's not like, here's Miss Saigon. Of course, they have an Asian music director.
Sure. Yeah, obviously. And, I think with Stephen as saying that, I think he was like on his wish list that he could music direct at least one Asian show in his life. But obviously, yes, I would love to see AAPI music directors directing everything, and seeing a lot of new musicals, no matter what ethnicity it's about, having AAPI people not just in the pit, but also on the creative team and in the cast, and and kind of getting us a little more representation in this industry. And it's hard, right? Because this industry is based on, ethnic identity most of the time. There's a lot, that's where the one of very few industries where we're allowed to ask that question of people, like, what is your background, things like that for purposes of the art. So,
but I also think that there's a fine line between ethnic identity and tokenism too, because we're,
right, absolutely.
I think, if you see an Asian music director, if you see an Asian conductor conducting Miss Saigon, there's that ethnic identity of like, that makes sense. I think visually it makes sense. But if you see an Asian music director, conducting Assassins, there's always that tokenism thing. And I that's something that's been that I have personally been thinking about a lot ever since this conversation really was brought to the foreground about, are you being brought onto a project because you're not white, or you being brought on because you're good at your job? And it was the same thing in television, because when I was looking for jobs in television, a big part of who they hire on camera is they want to reflect the demographics of the community. So would you be hired because you're a good reporter, you're a good anchor, or are you being hired because 30% of your community is Asian, so you need to have Asian representation? So there's a lot of that I'm finding, and I'm hoping that I'm being hired for work because I'm good at my job, and that's all.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. That's a very fine line because, we've both experienced it, being tokenized and whatever, we're being put into. Hopefully not a lot, but like I've definitely been there. And, you want to make sure sometimes, and especially on my end of the table as a producer, that when I do hire in that sense, that it's meaningful and it has a purpose. It's not just, you're saying, like, not hiring to hire, like it's hiring because it specifically fits a reason, rather than the tokenism that usually happens in some situations. But where can people find you, Ted, if they want to hire you? Like, is there a website that they can go to? Is it social media where you're most responsive? How can they find Ted Arthur to get to know you, or, you know, even those that want to have like informational interviews with you to hopefully find a mentor in you as well?
Well, I'm on the Muse directory, and if you go to Muse's website, I'm on there with some information, but also I'm on Instagram, Ted R. Arthur. I'm not really on Twitter, so I don't really do that.
Neither am I.
But I'm on Instagram, and, you know, or if you're in New York and come and see Diana, I'll be down in the pit.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to chat with us. You're welcome back anytime if there is anything in the future you want to bring into the fold or the conversation. We're definitely going to move into small group conversations in the next season because we're almost at the end of this season. So all the best of luck to you with everything, and I will definitely make a way up to New York to see your show too. So and hopefully see you in person for the first time in too long. So yeah, come back when you can, but I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for highlighting AAPI members in our community. I think it's really important.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We are produced by Press Play Podcast, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a review and a rating, and be sure to send us any topic ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, and read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com. We hope you join us again soon.